Hey Nerdpreneurs, couple things about today's Talkin' Nerdy. This episode is Frank and I sharing some insights and reflections from our interview with OnlyCrits, a dice distribution company. If you'd like to listen to the original interview, we have a cut-down free version of it. It is Season 1, Episode 4, and I'll put a link in the show notes for you. For the full 1 hour and 10-minute interview and the full version of this Talkin' Nerdy, both are available at our Patreon. This interview was awesome, especially if you're interested in how to break into a nerd market like Dungeons & Dragons and start making full-time income. Now, without further ado, here is today's episode.
Talking nerdy. We just talking nerdy. With all this talking nerdy. Oh, come on, you wanna talk nerdy?
Welcome to the OnlyCrits Talkin' Nerdy episode. We're going to dive deep into OnlyCrits episode and just sort of extrapolate Frank and I's takeaways right off the bat. I like this episode. This was our first episode with two people.
Yeah.
Which was interesting, an interesting experience. It was also a beast to edit because there was a lot of technical recording issues, and I hope that everybody didn't notice.
You can't tell, man. You did a great job. I mean, so for the folks listening, Eric, his internet kept cutting out here and there, so we would have conversations with just Eric in the beginning and then just Rory at different times. And it was an interesting back and forth, but ultimately, you know, we got some great wisdom from both of them. And Chris, I think you did a great job of making it seem seamless. So good job, buddy.
I love that praise, but
I
actually really enjoyed this episode, and they were one of the first people we booked, actually, but they took a long time to record, so they were probably like one of the, I want to say, we recorded them kind of midway through actually doing all of our seasons, even though I have had a relationship with OnlyCrits for a while. They've been a sponsor of my previous podcast. I have promoted them on my Instagram, Professor Epic Productions, and it's really and he had reached out to me when he was just starting out to look for people who were kind of big in the D&D space on Instagram and to be an affiliate. And I was like, oh yeah, that sounds awesome. And I had also been approached by a number of different dice companies actually at that point. And I'd also reached out to a few different dice companies, and a few things stood out to me about them. One is like, they just seemed like cool guys, really nice, and they seemed like they understood the hustle. They were working hard. Two, they were from Vancouver, which I really liked, that they were a local dice company, and I like to support local. And also, I just really liked the products. I got a couple of their products. I wouldn't do anything if I didn't actually like it. And when I got them, they were like, oh, these are really sweet dice. Like, they actually look really good. They don't roll too badly. I had a few really good rolls with them. And I actually got, I mean, how else do you judge a dice except I got to play with them? And then this becomes my favorite dice, and I happen to be winning. And when they say only crits, I got a few ones. But I tell you, they tended to roll well. So I kept going back to them.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this episode too. Like you said, having two guests was a change for us. And then later on we had two guests again. But I think that having a question asked to one of them and then asked to the other was super important. And I'm really glad we would do it. Sometimes I felt kind of like, we got some good stuff. Let's move on. But then I would stop myself and be like, no, this should be fair. We should ask both of them. And then I'd always be very glad that we did, because then it doubled the amount of golden nuggets of wisdom that we got.
It was a nice way to have. It was a nice thing to see two friends running a business being in that situation, right? They go way back.
Yeah, 5 years old. That's crazy.
Yeah. It's really interesting to be like, whoa, they have known each other a long time. And then one day, and especially, this is our classic COVID story, right?
Classic.
Is that we heard this so many times of like, well, COVID hit and I was broke, or I had to quit a job, or I didn't have a job. Or we said, hey, you know what, let's just try this and see, because I think a lot of people went through that process of really reevaluating their life at that moment. And Eric sounded like he has always wanted to be sort of an entrepreneur since he took business, and just took that and ran with it, and it became a viable business that they do full time as, you know, best friends. And that's kind of an awesome story. It's pretty wicked to illuminate on that. I thought it was a perfect nerdpreneur story to bring to the season.
You just, in your in your statement there, you just hit on the three things I really want to talk about. So
Cool.
we'll start off at the beginning, though, which is, yes, COVID catalyst. The COVID catalyst is what I'm penning right now
I like
as this
that.
term. It really was a catalyst for people being stuck at home or people having their day jobs and routines disrupted. So they got to reevaluate what they wanted to do. We're all familiar with the story at this point, especially if you've been listening to our episodes. And that was really great to see how it brought two friends who were already friends closer by doing a project together. And they were already thinking about this. Eric was already thinking about this before COVID hit. So, right at the very beginning, he was already ready with an idea. So, he hit the ground running. And then the story of his job, I loved that about how
Mm.
he left his job gradually.
Have you
And
ever
then
left a job, Frank? Have you ever been like, I'm quitting to go do this other thing? Or
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, I've had a lot of odd jobs, usually in food and beverage, and whenever I quit one, I'm usually going on to something else. But for various reasons. So hearing his story, I was like, oh, I wish that it's great to quit a job and then they want you back, but you
Mm,
say, sorry, I have a better thing going on. That I have not had.
mm.
That's
Yeah.
really cool.
It is pretty cool, and it's also like following your passion, getting a chance to be able to do something in the industry. Because it was clear that what I found interesting was that Rory was really the person who had driven the D&D idea into Eric's head. It sounds like,
Hmm.
and Eric was just like, "Oh, this is awesome! I could make money with this. All right." And then that sort of businessy brain started working, and then the two of them came up with the idea to sell dice. And I mean,
Hmm.
I, I I mean, selling dice seems like a pretty, I don't want to say easy business model, but here's something I found interesting was that it seemed to me the level of stress that they have is pretty low. Like
Yeah.
they don't seem stressed very
On
much at
Eric's
all.
side, I would say Eric's side has less stress and his relationship with stress has gotten better. Rory kind of was hinting at some stresses of writing enough content in time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess that's the artistic creative process. But when you compare that to like the other duo, which was like the brother sister duo in D&D and a Castle, like their
Right.
level of stress is just
So
so
different.
different because
So different.
like
Yeah.
they both decided to start a business around the same time almost, but maybe a year apart from each other. And it was like,
You mean D&D and a Castle and OnlyCrits? Oh no.
yeah,
Well, I've just got to jump in real quick. D&D and a Castle they said their first one was 2018, I think. So that was a few
yeah.
years ago.
Oh, I guess so. I guess so. Yeah, maybe it's like 2 years then, because they
We're
started in
splitting hairs.
2020. We're splitting hairs in like
Which,
the
yeah,
world of
sorry.
business.
Go ahead to your
But
point.
the point is that like Only Crits was a great example of how you could start with something fairly, I want to say, low expense
Mhm.
and probably not a huge amount of investment. He was just like, I thought up the idea, I started making a website the next day, and then I started reaching out to people, and it was like this process of building. And he even talks about having a job that he kept for a while, slowly transitioning until this thing got big enough that he
Mhm.
could actually say, I'm going to quit my job. Whereas the other philosophy was the DNA in the castle model, where we're like, well, this is going to cost us a lot of money, so we
Yeah.
have to invest already. And they just took the risk, the leap, and just went for it from this
Mhm.
point of, well, I want to have this happen and take the risk. And it's just, I don't know, the level of stress because the numbers were so much bigger versus what we heard from Eric and Rory, where it's like, we're making a full time income and it's cool, but we're not stressed out. We're just like enjoying it. We do what we want and, we check the orders every day. Like, it didn't seem to me like they were under the level of pressure to like get this thing done and be accountable to so many more people. But they're both working in the same industry, just very different
Mhm.
business models and very different levels of stress.
Yeah, his Eric's comment that he made that was pretty much the second thing I wanted to talk about. He talked about his willpower, and I totally agree with what he said, and I think a lot of listeners would too. But the willpower that you have for something, a project, is only going to last you so long. He specifically said I could do anything for like 2 weeks if I'm excited about it. I've got and I will go for it 2 weeks. Then I'm going to burn out. But
Mm-hmm.
eventually, for him, he was saying that if I'm passionate about it, like I am about Dungeons and Dragons and dice and these adventures, then I can just keep going. And that ties into what we've heard from other people. Doing something that you're passionate about is great, but also doing something with someone else, whether, for D&D in a Castle, it was a brother-sister duo. If you are doing something with other people on your team, or you've got employees that are also passionate about it, then you're not going to be the only one pushing this machine. And that's so cool. And I think that what he said about that was great. The second thing that he said that I really liked was his relationship with stress and how that has helped him succeed. That
Yeah.
we kind of didn't talk a lot about it in the episode, which is a shame, but going into the depth of what our stress and our relationship with that stress is. Are we afraid of it, or do we recognize that it is something that helps propel us?
Well, the way he put it was, he said, I think if you can get your stress behind you,
Yeah.
it's good. And I really liked that, because that is true. And
Get in your corner.
because I've been in a lot of times where I ran my own business and I've been very stressed before, and it can paralyze you or it can drive you. And you can either be stressed out to hit your goals, or you can be stressed out to not hit your goals. And so the perspective change is all in between your ears. It's
Mhm.
all in your head. And how important it is to have the right perspective when you're going to go into business or entrepreneurship for yourself. One of the first skills I think you have to be able to do is manage your own psychology in your head, so that you don't get so stressed out over, say, the big numbers, or over the risk involved, or even over what it is you need to do to accomplish, and not get paralyzed by your stress, because a lot of people just don't know how to
Yeah.
handle it. And it's the shifting in mentality, right? It's the idea of asking a different question, is like, how can I use this stress to my advantage? And so good stress versus bad stress, I think, is an interesting dichotomy that was brought up in the episode, and we kind of talked a little bit about. But
Mhm.
I don't know, I'm
It's
curious, what do you think about that, Frank?
Yeah, I think that yeah, sure, we did talk about it a bit. I just really love the topic around our mindset around stress. I think that it's a survival mechanism we've evolved to have, and we can use it to our benefit rather than being afraid of it. Unfortunately, our society right now has so much going on in our lives that stress has become, I mean, our body injects stress into the natural physiology a lot more than we evolved to withstand. So I think that it ties into some health issues that we have. But if you can change your mindset around it, there is some good research suggesting that your health will not suffer nearly as much as it does for people who work those crazy jobs that stress them out every day. um, and if you can accept that stress is there as like a fuel or a reminder to work hard, that's good.
Well, and here's, I guess, the thing I guess I want to point out is that all stress is a mindset.
Yes.
Who's causing the stress in your life is not, like, I think we talk about stress as if it's this thing outside of us that is like being pressed in upon us. It's
Yeah,
like,
it's not an external force.
oh my God, all this stress in my life is coming in and controlling it. And
Yeah.
in actuality, the only stress that is happening is what you are creating in your head by having a perspective that that stress is painful.
Mhm.
And there's a real power in being able to shift psychology around that stress to, there are techniques. I learned this in sales and management when I would work with people who were new to sales and straight commission sales, because it's very stressful for a lot of people when they don't have the experience of, trusting themselves to make consistent money or take consistent action. They stress themselves out so much. And even just one perspective change that I remember for me that I consistently use is, instead of saying I have to do this thing, it's I get to do this thing.
Mm, mhm.
It's a
Yeah.
weird stress decreaser in my mind, because if you're running something on your own as your own business, you're doing this for the opportunity to be that person who uses the stress in a positive way and creates something that is bigger than yourself. And you're getting to do that. So the idea of like, man, I have to check orders today. I have to send out packaging. I have to make the logo. I have to make the website. I have to craft an ad. I have to make content. All of that is going to make you paralyzed because you're pushing this stress on yourself like someone else is making you do it. And we don't
Mhm.
respond well. I think entrepreneurs don't respond well to that. Versus, I get to do this. I get to create the content to drive people to my business. I get to become the boss of my own destiny here.
It's
And I
so
get to
funny.
make much more money than other people by doing it properly. I
I
get to
hear
use my
you.
creative energy. It's all of this getting to do it. That slight shift can really make a difference in people actually being able to take action and use stress the right way.
I hear you. It's just funny hearing you get into that. You're the momentum you just you built up. I was thinking, gosh, who is this? This sounds so much like someone, and it's Tim Ferriss. That is so Tim Ferriss. The vein you just went down was I can just see him in his videos, the way he talks with like a rhythm, and then he says it's all a mindset,
Mhm.
right? You think about it's all so it just goes to show that our models, role models, our influencers that definitely make an imprint. You and I have some overlap, and that's funny. But
Yeah, well, he is the millennial generation's,
Messiah.
I
It's a
don't
bit
like to use
strong word,
I don't like
but
using the religious terminology Messiah, but yeah, I would say guru of some sort. He's like the
yes, guru.
millennial
Way
guru.
better. That's way
Yeah,
better.
yeah.
Although, yeah, yeah. So anyway, but the other thing, I kind of want to shift gears here and just acknowledge, because this was a very Dungeons and Dragons focused episode, given what they make, and something I loved. You can probably tell in the episode was getting to talk with Rory about his process for writing and world building, and the fact that they're releasing their own world is pretty cool, that their adventures are going to be set and going forward. I think that has it didn't hit me in the conversation, but it hit me listening back to it. That the IP, the getting to build a space. I mean, it's the beginning days of what it was like for Forgotten Realms. When they first said we're going to have a world that we build in, or Greyhawk, Gray.
Yeah, Greyhawk.
It is Greyhawk? Okay. I was getting it confused with some other IP. But that idea that they can then continue to flesh this space out with the pantheon, the legends, the characters, and then they can come back to those, it's going to be super fun for their audience. And I think that that's great. So hearing their process and their goals was really cool on a nerdy level.
I agree. I think that being able to, yeah, dig in and create your own world, that was cool. And also, I think writing content and generally, a lot of people want to be writers. Hearing some of the techniques that he had for just, it's not okay for me to write. Sorry, it's okay for me to not write for a day. It's not okay for me to not write for a month or a month and a half. And he stressed on the idea of having deadlines or that outside pressure, which really we know is the pressure he's putting on himself because he sees himself as someone who is a creator of these adventures, and there's that obligation to Eric and to his company and to his followers and to everybody else that he gets these adventures together. But he's allowing that stress to be behind him and move him in a direction towards the goals he wants. So I agree that I think it was interesting to hear from him how, like, he does a lot of reading in order to keep his creativity together. He's always engaging with different
Content.
stories and content to keep the creative juices flowing. And I think that when you're a writer, you're figuring out how to write
Mm-hmm.
as you're doing it. And
Sure.
he's and every writer has different techniques for that.
He also talked about having deadlines, and given that and you did say that the idea of deadlines is important, and I think he's got it very well established, given that he was a freelancer before this, a freelance writer. And I like that he could bring that, because it wasn't the flimsy whimsy artist stereotype. It was, I had deadlines and I had deliverables that I had to present.
How do you get yourself to write, Frank? Do you have any methods around that kind of thing?
Oh
Because
yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it's very similar. I mean, I don't have deliverables that I aim for, but I definitely have things that I want to accomplish. When I was doing a lot of writing, pretty much before we started this podcast, I was doing a lot of writing. And that was okay. I want to sit down 3 times a week and I want to write just for 10 minutes. And you make it small and achievable. And I know fully well those 10 minutes are going to turn into an hour and a half because time flies by and I love creating the homebrew and the story. And I just love it so much.
Hmm.
Um,
Well,
and
once
there,
you start, right? It's hard sometimes to start, but then once you start, an idea gets you, or something captures
Oh
you,
yeah.
lights you on
I find
fire.
something I really want to work on, whether it's a mechanic or a character or the actual story or the pantheon. I always love working on the pantheon and creating the legends that and the myths and like the myth versus what actually happened. So I love creating that, like, oh, and the people know this, but certain groups of people who actually study the scripture would know this. But what actually happened for people who were there was this. And that's a lot of fun for me as someone who studied history.
Cool. I always I heard some great advice from Neil Gaiman. If you know, he's
Mm.
a great writer.
If I know, I love this guy. He is so his writing. He makes any story just like a page turner. Any
Yeah,
concept.
yeah, he's really amazing as a writer, and also he has been interviewed on various podcasts. He doesn't do many of them, but I remember him talking about the writing process and how his main rule when he is writing is that when you go to write, you're allowed to do nothing, or but you're not allowed to do anything else. So
Oh,
when you sit down, you are allowed to write. Okay, you're allowed to do nothing, but you're just not allowed to do anything else. And eventually boredom sets in, and then you have to start writing because
yeah.
that's the only activity that's allowed for the X number of time that you're doing it. And he says that's how he gets himself into the writing flow. And so he could be sitting down in his garden or in a studio or whatever, and he might just be watching outside the window or just doing that or doing
Yeah.
nothing kind of for a little bit until something strikes, and then you can move into writing, but you're not allowed to go do something else. And I thought that was a really valuable thing because every time I've done this and sat down to write, I've set those kind of rules in place that okay, for the next 45 minutes I can do nothing, but I am allowed to write. That's the only thing I'm allowed to do.
Reminds me of what something that one of my early acting teachers told me, which was she was having us do scenes over and over with our scene partners. We would be in different groups, so it wasn't in front of the class, but we just keep doing it over and over and over. And we all got so bored. But she would always say, "From boredom comes creativity." And I remember thinking it was such bullshit. And then I started to just try random things, and I actually had fun. And I was like, "Wow, she's onto something." I don't like a lot of what she says, but this is a really good point. And that totally ties in with Neil Gaiman. And I totally agree. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful day. And yeah, anything you want to say, Chris?
Keep it nerdy.
Yeah, keep it nerdy.
You just finished the TIE Fighter version of this episode with Frank and Chris. If you want to hear the Death Star version, become a member of our
Awesome Nerdpreneur Board.
board members get access to all extended versions of our episodes and access to our AMA advice show where Chris and I answer your burning hot questions. Go to patreon.com/nerdpreneur to become a member of the
Awesome Nerdpreneur Board.
For just $10 a month, we'll infect your brain with great ideas. Thanks for listening, and as always, keep it nerdy.